tell younger people to listen. You'll learn a whole lot. Next up, here's a young man who I was fortunate to meet, I guess almost, several months ago. It really picked up as he and I individually and separately looked at this guy named Larry Krasner running for DA. I had known Larry for a decade at least, but found out several months ago, actually about a year ago, that he might have aspirations to become DA. So I began to do my thing to support Larry Krasner, and I began to meet some great people, including this young man, Abe Gutman. And Abe does a lot of stuff, great activist, great researcher, all that, but I really love the way he writes because he's fact-oriented. Now, he certainly has his own position, but his position is based on fact. And he wrote a recent article about the Inquirer's endorsement of Beth Grossman, who's running against Larry Krasner. And by the way, read this next Sunday. Next Sunday's Tribune, I have an article which is going to follow up on what Abe did. It's going to be a call to action for all people, especially black people, to support Larry Krasner. By the way, any Beth Grossman fans out there, if you want to call in, I'll get you in. If you want to have Beth Grossman to call in, I'll get her in. And there's one person who I'm really disappointed. I hope the rumors are not true, but there's an influential black person who I heard is endorsing Beth Grossman. I hope it's not true. I'm not going to say his or her name until it gets confirmed, but I'm 99.9% sure it is true. Having said that, let's talk to Abe about his article. Abe, how are you today?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being with us. And Abe, before we get to your article about the Inquirer's endorsement of Beth, or even if you want to just focus on your position as to why you're leaning to one candidate versus the other, just spend about 30 seconds, Abe, giving us some background about you so people know who you are. Then we'll jump into the topic.
Yeah, so I moved to Philadelphia about a year ago from New York, a year and a half ago now. And I really interested in criminal justice. My background is research on stop and frisk. I'm an economist in training. And I really got into the DA's race, and it was a good crash course of Philadelphia politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very surprised from the things I saw from a city that is, very liberal, progressive on one hand. On the other hand, you see that there's no ailment in the criminal justice system that doesn't exist in Philadelphia. And you have to remember that this is the largest poor city in America. This is the most incarcerated city in America and rate by population. And death penalty still exists in Philadelphia. And so really we see stop and frisk in higher rates than New York right now. So we really need to focus on not patting ourselves on the back too much when we think of Philadelphia as this progressive or blue haven in what is now a red state.
That's a good way to put it. In fact, a great way to put it. But let's get to the facts. As I said, your articles are fact-based. Let's say I'm a Beth Grossman supporter, and I say, well, look, Abe, what the hell are you talking about? She has experience in the DA's office. Larry does not. She's focused on victims. Larry's focused on victimizers. What's your response?
So I think that the response of Beth Grossman and generally in the DA race is kind of three parts. So first of all, we have to look at evidence. And tough on crime stances are not tough on crime. They just make you sound like a tough guy, or a tough gal in this case. And I heard her in a debate this week talking about, that sometimes for really bad drug dealers, we need mandatory minimum sentencing. Why? Mandatory minimum sentences have proven over and over again to reduce public safety. They've proven over and over again to be racially biased. So we need to remember when people say mandatory sentencing, that means that a judge can't decide what the sentence will be because there's a minimum in the law.
And just so folks know, the judge at least knows who the person is, knows what the person did, knows about the person's background, knows whatever mitigation took place, but now the judge is locked into that. Very quickly, Abe, I had a case, I didn't have the trial, I had it on appeal. A young lady got into a dispute with her boyfriend, and he was assaulting her. She pulled out a gun, and she shot him. Now, it could have been self-defense, but the problem is that after she shot him, slight wound, superficial wound in the leg, they concocted a story that somebody broke in and tried to rob them. The story unraveled, and this young lady, a college student at Lincoln University, got a mandatory 5-year state prison sentence. Think about that. Go ahead, Abe.
And mandatory minimums, by the way, are just, and I don't want to go on a tangent, are mainly for drug offenses, are one of the biggest drivers of mass incarceration because they are such an incentive to plead guilty.
Yes.
So you sit and you know that if you didn't have anything on you, you had a little bit of marijuana, someone said you also had cocaine. Now, a cop, not someone. Now, you sit in a room with a detective that tells you, or a prosecutor that tells you, listen, you go to a judge, he has to give you 20 years, mandatory minimum. That's it. But if you plea, we can give you 5. Now, you're innocent, and you know that people, when go to judges, mainly black people, mainly black males, mainly young, that go in front of judges for drug offensive, get convicted. So what do? You're an innocent man, and your chances are better with 5 years. So Beth Grossman, what she, I hope, means to say is that she thinks that there are some offenses that deserve harsh sentencing, and we all agree on that. But mandatory minimums are not the right way to get those harsh sentences. So when we see someone who is supposed to sound tough on crime and talks about increasing public safety and endorses policies that do not increase public safety, we need to go beyond how it sounds. So that's my first issue. My second issue is that the experience of the prosecutor is problematic, not because she's a prosecutor. I think prosecutors can make great DAs. I think Larry Krasner made it clear that there are reformers in the DA's office that he would love to work with, and he thinks actually should be promoted. Because in the current culture, they didn't get the voice that they should have. The problem is that if you listen to her, it sounds like the DA's office is doing amazing work. And while they're doing work, it's a fairy tale to say that there are big reforms in place. Again, largest rate of incarceration from any city in America, Philadelphia. So unless we say that Philadelphians are inherently more criminal than other people, which I refuse to accept, and we need to be more critical about the DA's office itself. And just saying, I'll continue these reforms, and not being able to be critical and say, I am a person who thinks that these reforms are a part of the problem because they're too weak. That's the problem. And if we really look at her time at the DA's office, most of it wasn't as a prosecutor. It was the head of a task force that did public nuisance, meaning taking away people's home without conviction, that was deemed by state and federal court as being unconstitutional. And she said it was just following the law. And the inquirer said that that's the good answer.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, A, because Nazi soldiers followed the law. Slave owners followed the law. Please continue.
And that leads me exactly to piece number 3. We are in front of an administration, a federal administration, that is going to pass very, very, very bad laws. And if we ignore Trump for 1 second, there's a very scary man called Jeff Sessions, who is the Attorney General of this country, who has amazing power, and as a person who is racist in all his heart, was dreaming of this position, I believe, from his childhood, because he can have the most impact on destroying black communities from that office. So when he passes down a rule, we can't have a DA that says, listen, guys, this is the law. This is the new law. We need to have a DA that will approve of maintaining practices that are positive in a time that we have a very dark regime in the Attorney General's office. And you see that in the conversation on sanctuary cities. All the sanctuary cities say is that the local police officers that come from our tax money, I'm an immigrant and I pay taxes in Philadelphia, will not operate as immigration forces. Beth Grossman opposes that. So then we have and then the issue is that she's silent on Trump, that she's dancing this line of being, a Republican on one hand, running a Republican ticket. She's getting money from the GOP. She went on Breitbart Radio in a conversation that in the same interview before her, a listener, and excuse me, I'm just quoting, called Obama raghead. And the person who interviewed her and laughed, also the campaign contributor to Beth Grossman. So she gets the amplifier of Steve Bannon to her campaign, and then she can't condemn Donald Trump for drawing moral equivalence between anti-racist protesters and Nazis.
I'm so glad you broke that down. Abe, we're going to have you back on because we're running out of time, but you always bring the powerful information. Let's do this. In the final 30 seconds, if you can just highlight some of the points you mentioned or add something, but more important, your contact information. One thing I do want to say before you highlight in 30 seconds the points you're making today and give us your contact information, this is the same woman, Beth Grossman, who's endorsed by the same police union that endorsed Donald Trump. What does that tell you? The final 30 seconds are yours, Abe.
So my contact information is on any social media. It's just ABGUTMAN, and that's where you can find me on Twitter, Facebook. I don't do Instagram. And that's also my email at Gmail, so please. And that's my last point, and you mentioned that before in the conversation before with the minister.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's hard now that for some people, this is a part of the process, right? Like, it's hard for us to be a part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, many of us see themselves as radicals. So if I can end with a quote of, my favorite, W.B. Du Bois,
yep.
Who no one can blame for not being a radical, mainly his time. So in 1905, in the resolution of the Niagara Movement, he says, "How shall we get them? By voting where we may vote, by persistent, unceasing agitation, by hammering at the truth, by sacrifice and work." So voting is a part of that, and it's not goes against the agitation. It doesn't go against hammering the truth. So I really hope that November 7th, people will come out, show up, because we have a real chance to have the most progressive prosecutor in America in our city, and we can't miss that opportunity.
Abe, thank you for spending time with us. And more important, thanks for the powerful, fiery information, factual information you include in all your columns. I hope that folks wrote down your contact information because they need to follow you. Next week, I'm going to be talking about Krasner. I'm going to invite Krasner or a spokesperson on. I'm going to invite Grossman or a spokesperson on, and I want you and other folks to listen in and call in. Abe, keep up the great work, and thank you for tuning in and calling in to WURD 96.1 FM. Abe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That was Abe Gutman. That's Gutman.